So we also wanted to announce, especially for our crowd in Berlin, that we will make a live taping of Potluck Food Talks at the Podfest Berlin. It will be on October 14th, and we're going to talk about sandwiches. We're also going to serve some food, and we will prepare a very special episode that will be recorded live in front of an audience. So if you want to visit us, just go to podfestberlin.com and get your tickets. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Potluck Food Talks. Today, we're going to talk about harmony. So what's the deal with harmony? What are your thoughts on... Well, actually, I think we should talk about composition in general and which are the processes to compose a dish in the context of a menu, right? Because a dish should always be part of a menu, even if you're cooking at home or if you're preparing a Christmas dinner or whatever. In the best case, this should all be a harmonious concept, right? Considering the people that is coming, the place where you are, and the drink and the food, of course.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like a dish in itself. Well, that's also like, I mean, if we're starting there, it's kind of like, how do you define harmony, you know? And like, does a dish have to be fully harmonious? What does it mean, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've compared many times the idea that let's say a musician and a chef, both are harmony managers some way. So I wanted to understand the etymology and what it actually means. And first Greek and then Latin, but it means things fitting together, making things fit, which makes absolute sense in music and in food, right? And you could also put there poetry or painting or many different things, right? These are the things that you're trying to achieve when you're conceptualizing a dish. So what's your process? Let's say you have to make a menu next week, let's say for a grill that will be in the countryside. So what happens in your mind at that point?
Well, there's many things coming together, no? Like you just said, it's like on one side, obviously like the most obvious that you think about is sort of like, okay, what ingredients am I working with? And then you have, you have sort of like, especially if we compare it to like music or something, you have your sort of like very broad keynotes, say you want something fresh and acidic, or you want something sweet, right? So like, obviously harmony doesn't mean that everything is kind of like just a round sphere. No, of course you have like a certain direction that it goes in. But then everything around those sort of like key notes has to kind of like fit together, perfectly. So you kind of think sort of like, okay, where am I at? Which is like terroir, which was what we talked about the last episode, what ingredients do I have to work with? And then also, the mood and the whole sort of like idea of the menu plays into it. Do you want it to be long and like a sort of banquet? Do you want it to be sharing style, family style, and all those things, they come together in the consideration. How many dishes do I want to do? Why? Because it's not just like, oh, I'm going to do 8 dishes because why not? There's a thought behind it, a sort of like intuitive feeling of sort of like, this feels right,
Yeah. Like in my case, I do these things mainly specifically for Christmas dinners, because if I'm in family, I'm going to be usually the person that is cooking. And what my family do is that they just drop me in the largest supermarket in the city and tell me buy whatever you want. My process in that case is that I will work with what I have available. And while I'm walking in the supermarket and seeing the products, in my mind, I'm building the dishes. Like, okay, this could be the side dish. I could use this for the salad. I didn't know they had this here. And then I have an idea. Okay, let's look if they also have this other thing. And just for practical purposes, I won't go crazy about, I'm missing this super specific ingredient that I need that we will have to take a 3-hour drive to find it or something like that. That's something I want to avoid, because I have the resources to work out any replacement or any way around, to do like a different variation of any dish without a specific ingredient, or I do something else. If the ingredient is really like a key ingredient that without it wouldn't make sense. That on one side. And on the other side, also when I'm making even pincho tours, when I'm bar hopping and having pinchos, I always have like in my mind, like a background radar where I'm building a menu.
Yeah.
And I follow the principles, some key principles that I learned from traditional kaiseki, this Japanese tea menus. The most orthodox traditional ones, not, but like I took the principles that are common sense principles when you're eating. You want to have fish and vegetables and lighter flavors first, and then stronger flavors. Also, you want to start with lighter drinks like whites, and then going to the reds, and then dessert. Like it's pretty basic to work it out like that. But it's common sense for people that understand food. But I've seen people, for instance, making pincho tours, making an absolute mess in your stomach, mixing up the drinks, starting with, the meat and ending with the anchovies at chepecha before dessert. For me, that's a total mess.
Yeah.
It's not harmonious.
Totally. And it's like, that's also the thing. It's kind of like harmony in the sort of like structure, it's kind of like if it's just a mess, it's going to be very unenjoyable because it's a very physical experience to eat, And the more you go to depth with all these like elements that make up like decision makings in how you put things together, there's also one thing, like you said, it's kind of like if you're with the example of the supermarket, having to rely on what there is, gives you such a creative boost in a way, because it's like a limitation, but you have to make it work with what there is. And so you use the tools that you have around you. And of course you want it to be even like, you're limited, but in that limitation, you find like a creative process. And it's the same with like regionality and regional products and like very high seasonality, It's kind of like, well, like, hey, this would go really well with avocado and yuzu, right? Because like everything does. But it's like, well, it's fucking, we're, I don't know, in Krakow, Poland, there's no avocado and yuzu, So you have to make it work. And then kind of like, how do I get there? It's kind of like, if we go with that example, it's sort of like, okay, if I want something fatty, creamy, but like still vegetably, what can I use? And like, okay, if I want something floral, acidic, what is there? What can I use? And then there's also like, what I also think is like really crazy about cooking is that you have this very sort of free creative side where, you can look at the ingredients and be like, okay, I can combine this with this, but also it's something very memory related eating, like very nostalgic and things that we've like experienced. I mean, from one side, from like often from our family side or sort of like experiences we had as a child.
Yeah. And you can't mess around with that. Like you can say like, oh, for instance, here in the Basque Country, there is like this corn tortilla variation that has been here for centuries. It's called talos. You probably know it. It's also with nixtamalized corns. And if you ask people here, they will tell you that this is from here. Yeah, right. But since the colonization of the Americas, where corn came from. But yeah, if you tell a Basque I didn't found the talos, but we have this corn tortillas, and they will behead you, publicly. That's something that will happen. Yeah, you can't mess around with memories. I also was thinking, and this is something probably you that are still working in a kitchen, this moment that is very a chef's moment where you're finishing a sauce and perhaps you are asking another colleague or the chef for a check, and perhaps because you're unsure because you have tried so much and they will use a vocabulary like it's out of balance or perhaps a little bit of sweetness or acidity or this or that. And I mean, that's a perfectly conversation just on that topic, on harmony, on finding balance. I think that's what it is all about.
Yeah, totally. I mean, with a sauce especially, because like it's just a liquid, right? And it's like a very lengthy process to make. I mean, usually like if we talk about like a jus or, something like that, such a long process to make where so many things can go wrong. And yeah, like I really learned that when I spent some time cooking Thai food. And before I did that, I just kind of like slid in because I was helping a friend of mine out and I didn't really know much about Thai food. And then like once I got into it, it actually taught me a lot about cooking, even, not just like in Thai food, but like just in regular cooking, like in European cooking. And I really remember like a moment where he was showing me how to make the somtam dressing, like the dressing for the green papaya salad. And it's just fish sauce, palm sugar, lime juice, tamarind, and chili. I think that's it. So in Thai food, you always have these you always talk about these main flavors, sweet, salty, sour, spicy, right? And that was the perfect example for me because I started mixing it and it's very, very intense, right? So you taste it and you're like, it's salty, but it needs to be more sour and sweet. And then you add more tamarind, you add more lime juice, you taste it and you're like, now it's a little bit too sour, it needs more tamarind. And you keep seasoning it up until you couldn't season any flavor anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I know exactly that process. The first restaurant where I worked, it was a French Caribbean restaurant. And there was a French Caribbean bouillabaisse. It was a variation of bouillabaisse with some Caribbean variations, right? It even had hot sauce, but that was a classic from the house and it has a very specific flavor. And yeah, especially salt. Salt is something okay, I will add a little bit more and a little bit more. And if you make too much, it's super hard to unsalt something. Nowadays, I actually would do it just calculating the percentage of the whole weight and just, that will actually save time and make it more precise. I want actually just for everybody to know between 1% and 2% is of the total weight is a good amount of salt. So if you're not sure about how much salt to add to something, a kind of tolerable but high level of salt, people that want savory, 2% is if you want to add, you could add that to a salad and it will have a proper amount of salt.
Totally. I do the same thing actually. And I only started to do that recently. I was always seasoning I have to say I'm a chef. I usually when I weigh something out, it's because I really have to,
Uh-huh.
I do everything kind of by feeling and by eye, but I started doing the same thing. For example, I was making this venison tartare lately. And so I take all the offcuts from a venison and then instead of just grinding it or cutting it raw, as you do, you freeze it just a little bit so it cuts clean. And then I weigh the weight and I just add 2% of salt.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then I let it through the grinder and it comes out very really red, really, really nicely, intensely red and with a perfect seasoning,
Exactly. Yeah. It feels like a perfect seasoning.
Yeah, exactly. All I have to do is mix it and serve it and done,
Yeah. I saw once a sashimi chef working and I asked him how much salt are you adding to this? And he said straightforward, 2%. 2% of salt. But that's also something flavors. I think it's also super important texture. If we talk about harmony, you also want to make the texture fit together. And if you screw the texture of something that was part of the concept of the dish, it just doesn't work anymore. There are a few places here that make this amazing pig's ear that is super soft on the inside, and it has to be super crispy, crystal crispy on the outside. Otherwise, that dish doesn't make any sense. But once in a while, especially when it's too crowded, you'll get a pig's ear that is not super crispy, and it just doesn't make sense. That's not the idea of the dish.
Yeah, shameful.
But what can you say about texture? I mean, and here, especially here in the Basque Country, texture plays a key role in the food identity. This stickiness, that collagen stickiness that you will find in many sauces and fishes and things and stews.
Yeah, it's texture is just as important as flavor, honestly, because it's if you think of an example of kind of and that's the difficult thing about making dishes. If you can make a puree, right, and season it perfectly and have it super silky smooth and stuff, and you taste it and you're like, oh, that's delicious, Well, make 3 other purees, and you can make them and be sort of okay, it's perfectly made, super nice, perfectly seasoned, but take a plate and put the fucking 4 purees together. It's going to be a shit dish,
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's it just doesn't work, It's and that's something that's very hard to explain because you can't say oh, you need something creamy, you need something crispy. No, that's not how it works because it's kind of there are no rules, but there are kind of rules, It's puree times 4 is not nice, but then sort of how much puree is enough?
Yeah.
Counterbalance that. Yeah.
I remember crazy moments also in the kitchen, working with maybe like a legendary chef, and I'm like making a puree and I give it to taste, and the chef will tell me like, add half a teaspoon or like a teaspoon of honey.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? I would have never come up with that. And I added it, and it tastes completely different. And it actually, it made absolute sense. And I was like, wow, completely like amazed about it.
Yeah. And that's that's a thing, because we can talk about like harmony and techniques and stuff like that to a certain extent where they make sense. But to a very large extent, also there's like an intuitive feeling that you have because of your experience,
But I think they're not exclusive one from each other. I think I think the intuition is aiming for harmony.
No, totally. But I mean, sort of like there's certain things that I can't really, that like you have to have the experience, and you have to have like tasted and made and seen and observed, and like worked with people to have this like thing. Because like, for example, now I have a fresh batch of apprentices in my kitchen, right? And so, you're kind of showing them, and they're like as fresh as they can be. And so you show them how to make a thing. Like, for example, I've got this like tomato essence, like vinaigrette, where first you make a tomato water, and then you make you lightly ferment it, make like a vinaigrette out of it. So it's very easy, but it has to be seasoned really perfectly to be really nice. And so they check in with me and they're like, okay, so how is this? And I'm like, no, you need to add more salt, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of verjus. And they're like, okay. So they start seasoning it, and they taste it to the point where they think it's perfect. And then you taste it and you're like, no, it needs more salt, more verjus. And they're like, okay. They make it again. They taste it. They're like, okay, now it's perfect. Now it's really good.
Yeah. That's the same process I had while I was learning to make this bouillabaisse I was talking about, because you had to add salt. You had to add hot sauce. It also had saffron. It also had like pastis.
Yeah.
And everything had to be in harmony. If you had too much Tabasco, too much salt, or too much pastis, or too much this, you will get like not the wanted effect.
Yeah.
We
sure.
haven't talked about another key factor in harmony, which is temperature, and you will see. You can tell a chef if you see someone in a restaurant where a dish comes and the guy or the person touches first the dish and then each single element of the dish with its fingers to check if it's warm or cold. That's it.
But you do.
You thought everybody did that?
No, I've never seen anybody do that. I would be really weirded out if
with the back of the finger touching like you do that. Come on.
Not when I'm in a restaurant, I don't do it. No.
I always touch the plate. First thing, I touch the plate to see if the plate is hot. That's like I don't know, something I have from the kitchen.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I do. It is super important, the temperature. I feel like it's one, especially in like European cooking or like Western kitchens in general. Asia is different, but it's something that we kind of forget about a little bit, because we're sort of like, well, like, because there's hot and there's really hot, right? And there's a big difference between those two. And I feel like often here we kind of think like, well, it's hot, steaming, it's freshly made, so it's fine. But, for example, if you go to Japan and you order a soup, and if it's not boiling hot, they will send it back, because the whole experience is completely different.
That happened to me once cooking ramen at home, and it wasn't super hot. And I realized like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because actually soup temperature is not common sensing, because if you're sending a broth, it's not okay to send it boiling hot and sending it because it will be too hot and it will take too long to eat. So it has to be like I don't know, 85 degrees or something like that, like just a step below that.
Yeah, but the thing is kind of like, if you're serving it, what temperature do you heat it to so that you like pour it into the bowl, the waiter comes, brings it out, by the time it lands on the customer. But then it's kind of like, but that's why chefs go so crazy also, it's kind of like you think about all these things and you like try to fucking find the perfect temperature for this fucking broth. And then you see it go out and you're like, oh yeah. And then it lands in front of the customer and they just ignore it for like 10 minutes, and just like keep talking and blah. And then it just starts taking the first sip and they're like, oh, this is cold. Like, what the fuck are they doing in the kitchen, you know? Then that makes me want to just kind of, you know, throw a pan at them or something. Not that we condone this behavior.
Well, just to finish the temperature thing, there is a saying in Spanish that is very straightforward. It's a culinary saying that says, lo caliente, caliente, y lo frío, frío. So what's supposed to be hot, hot, and what's supposed to be cold, cold. And that's something, you don't want a hot salad or a cold soup. So that's something that has to be managed also. And also, especially things that are fridge cold, you also don't want that. Let's say a tomato salad. You don't want a tomato that just came out of the fridge and it's super cold. That's horrible. Like it loses the whole meaning of eating a nice tomato.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I would say the very last thing, I would say the very last element in dish harmony, I would say it's the visual appeal. I remember once you were like giving opinions on this typical chef platforms that are on Instagram that post a lot of plating techniques and these kind of things, that some of these dishes you feel that they're like trying to make it as colorful as possible and adding as many elements as possible to make it look more pro. So like, and for me in many cases, that's exactly what they're communicating with those dishes. Like that I don't know, that hunger of showing off something just for its appeal, which I'm not interested at all.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like show me that you don't know how to cook without telling me that you don't know how to cook, you know? I really hate those sorts of like, it's not just these like Instagram influencers. There's a lot of chefs that do that also, you know, where the look of something is more important than the actual substance of the dish. Where it's kind of like, well, I've got this like pea water that when you add lime juice, it turns purple.
Yeah, or this how to say, these phrases like, let's add some green to this dish. And it's like, why green? You know, why are you talking about that color? For me, actually, I would say if there would be a hierarchy, the visual appeal, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't think there would be a hierarchy between flavor, texture, visual, and temperature. I think they're all as important. But I would say if the visual is not perfect and everything else is, it could be a killer dish, you know? If you have the flavor, the texture, and the temperature, but the dish, it could be something hidden inside that you can, under a foam, for instance. You know, you just see a white foam, and under it you have this universe of flavors and textures and temperatures, which is actually a resource that you will see once in a while in restaurants. Hiding the dish.
I think we need to make the difference between like because like the visual is very important, but the visual can be very simple, right? But like it's not the same like caring for the visual as saying, oh, let's add more color. That's the wrong way, you know. That's not the true way, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you can make something really nice just showcasing the product and the technique and you can just put an element in the center of the dish and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's visual.
It's kind of like, what's beautiful, you know? Like what is beautiful? Is a lot of flowers beautiful? Yeah, sure. But that's not the only thing that's beautiful. Is blanched green spinach that's super bright green, is it beautiful? Yeah, it's super beautiful. But spinach that's been slow cooked for like 2 hours and that's like army green, but like super tender and like cooked through like they do in Indian food, you know? It's not green, you know, it's more brown green, but that's very beautiful, you know? Like it's like, it is a leek that you like grill the shit out of until it's black, you know, and inside, and only when you cut into it, you see the like beautiful white inside. That's super beautiful, you know? So it's kind of like going with nature and going with the natural things, you know? is very nice. And like, in summer, you know, sort of like, I put a lot of flowers on my dishes at the moment because we have a lot in the garden, but that's over soon. And then you have to embrace the other things, you know, the autumn, the browns, you know, the muted colors, because that's what there is, you know. And I think once you, like, if you go with nature, you know, you find the aesthetic, you know, because nature isn't really wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also add, I learned from Thomas Keller, I think in an interview, he mentioned this. I think I have mentioned this in another episode, but he talks about the law of diminishing returns. That means that you add elements to something until a point that if you add more elements, you're not making it better, but worse. So that's the point you want to understand of a dish, that you add. Okay, here it is. If I add more, I'm starting to make it worse, not better. So, and understanding where that line is in any of the things we talk about, in flavor, in texture, in visual appeal, or in temperature, you have to understand that line that you want to get the best out of the dish.
Absolutely, like 100%. It's very difficult to get to that line. And it's like a playing, you kind of like, and you try to hit that line exactly, But often, especially when you're like younger and you're just starting, you overshoot it because you're overcompensating. And then like once you are able to hit that line, and then you try to do that all the time, and then you take it one step further and you take away, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I think. That's what I see really great chefs doing. It's like they are able to write that line perfectly, and then they're sort of like, no, now I'm going to take away. I'm going to do even less.
Yeah.
But the things that I do, they're exceptionally good. And like it takes so much skill to do a Magnus Nielsen and just serve a piece of meat with like a condiment, and that's enough. That's all you need. And it's an amazing dish. That's really difficult.
That's it for this week's episode of Potluck Food Talks. If you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok as Potluck Food Talks. The show airs every Monday.